Hi there, welcome to the archives. So this episode is called A Brief History of Western Feminism. March is Women's History Month, so the focus this month will obviously be on feminism. Not obviously, but this one is going to look at Western feminism, the different waves, and then the next one I'll do interventions from Indigenous, Asian, and queer feminists, and then I'll do one on transnational feminism, and then the fourth one for the month will be on looking at shame and the implications for feminists. So this one is a brief history in Western feminism. So historically and to date, people have defined feminism in many ways. In Sisterhood and Solidarity, Queering African Feminist Spaces, Awino Akesh said that feminism consists of, and this is a quote, our friendships, networks, and our bonds, organizations, and our individual and collective feminist energies. So they go on to say that the feminist movement is a space where feminists mobilize their feminist principles. For the most part, feminist principles promote equality and equity for all people, including women and girls. In this regard, feminism is a socio-political and revolutionary movement that works to end violence against women and girls. So a lot of people have a lot of questions or theories around what feminism is. At the very basic level, it's simply just working to end violence against women and to promote more equality between women and not just men, but just people in general. So in What's in a Name, Womanism, Black Feminism, and Beyond, Patricia Hill Collins cited activist Pericles' definition of feminism as, and this is a quote, the belief that women are full human beings capable of participation and leadership in the full range of human activities. It includes intellectual, political, social, sexual, spiritual, and economic. And Cleaves' articulation of feminism stresses the importance of recognizing the humanity of women and girls as integral in shielding them from and against oppressions of different sorts. So the idea of combating oppression is central to Bell Hooks' definition of feminism. In 1984, Hooks noted that feminism takes place anytime and anywhere people resist sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. And I think sometimes there's confusion around exactly what oppression is. Was it Meredith Fry? There's this definition of oppression that I believe it's from Meredith Fry. I'm not sure, don't quote me on that. But it was basically connecting it to the printing press. Remember before when newspapers were initially coming to the press, like the printing press, the process of newspapers was actually pressing. And so oppression, that word oppress is really integral to oppression, where you are pressing down, you are stifling, you are minimizing, you are crushing people, right? And so when I think of oppression, it's very much in that way, where a person is not allowed to thrive, they're not allowed to be free, they're not liberated. You are seeking to minimize and literally crush and press them. That's how I think of oppression at the very basic level. There's obviously different ways and shapes that it comes into being, but that's like the most, if you were to explain it to a second grader, that's how I'm thinking of it, connecting it with the printing press, this whole notion of pressing, right? So that is very central to feminism. That's what a lot of folks are working, is to end the exploitation and the oppression of women and girls. Because oppression takes place in different ways, so too does the work to end it, meaning that the breadth and depth of feminism is really expansive. For this reason, how feminism is expressed and practiced, it remains broad and contested. According to historian Estelle Freedman, the word feminism emerged in France in the 1880s. So the term combined the French word for women, which is femme, and isme, which refers to a social movement or political ideology, right? So by 1890, it has spread through Europe, making its way to North America and South America by 1910. And so we start finding it starts growing into different waves. first, second, third, and some Black feminists have even argued for a fourth wave. So first and second wave feminism, while feminism, okay, thank you so much. Okay, Jenny. So while feminism has become a convoluted movement, its inception was imagined by white feminists to have been way less nuanced and more straightforward, right? So the first two waves contextualized feminism as universal, premised on the idea that it was rooted in our biological and lived experiences as cisgendered women living in and resisting a patriarchal world. So there wasn't a lot of, right now there's a lot of conversations around trans rights, trans activism. There was not a lot of that emphasis in first wave feminism because it was assumed that what and who was a woman was rooted in biological, right, biology. And so it was a lot of cis women that was mainly at the forefront. This would change in later articulations, but I'll get to that later. So first wave feminists demanded an end to sexism and misogyny. So in North America, for instance, first wave feminism was active between 1880 and 1930, roughly. It was known as the suffrage movement. So during this time, women demanded gender equality with men through social reforms. So this era was marked by protests for human rights, such as the right to vote, the right to education, the right to work. Remember, women were not allowed to do a lot of these things, right? It was this very idea that women were barefoot, to be kept in the home, to be kept in the domestic realm, just having babies. I saw in the news recently they were talking about, I believe it was Afghanistan, and since the Taliban has come, a lot of women have been rendered back to the home. If they're outside, they're not allowed to socialize or communicate with folks. This is the news, so maybe it's a little bit, problematic, but I'm just saying what I saw and what I read. And it's this idea that women, the role of women is in the home, domestic. You're just to cook and clean, and that's it. You don't need to be educated. You don't need to be working, and you definitely don't need to vote. So in New Zealand was actually the first country to grant women voting rights in 1893. I often don't hear about feminism in New Zealand. If you think about feminism, it's usually, quote unquote, like the West, North America, and Europe. But New Zealand was actually the first country to grant women voting rights in 1893. Australia followed in 1902. Finland did the same in Europe in 1906. So Finland was the first country in Europe to allow women to vote in 1906. Canada was the first one in North America, and here we allowed women to vote in 1918. In South America, it was Ecuador that was the first one. They paved the way in 1928. And in Asia, it was Sri Lanka, which allowed women to vote in 1931. In Africa, Senegal was actually the first African country to let women vote, and that was in 1945. Again, when you think about feminism, we often don't hear a lot of these countries. You hardly hear about Senegal as women in feminism in Senegal, Ecuador, Sri Lanka, but these are some of the countries that were the first in their regions to allow women to vote. And so first wavers are seen as the founding and seminal figures in feminism, and this is understood broadly worldwide, right? So second wave feminism, on the other hand, was active after World War II, and this is between 1945 and 1975. Second wave feminism emphasized equal pay. So now that some women were able to work, the issue, and we're still facing this actually, is the emphasis was on equal pay with men. Right? It was on now reproductive rights. And right now, a lot of these issues we're dealing with, a lot of second wave feminists were dealing with as well too. Abortion, right? Reproductive rights, they were fighting for abortion rights in second wave feminism between 1945 and 1975. We're back there again. Equal pay, we're still fighting for that. Sexual liberation, we're still fighting for that. And so these were some of the works that started, though, early. And then an emphasis on violence against women. So this included domestic violence. So a lot of second-wave feminists, that's what they were fighting for. Equal pay, reproductive rights, the right to our sexual autonomy, and to say that women don't need to be beat in their homes. And this is actually a public issue. So Mary Tripp suggests that it was during the second wave that European and North American based organizations doing gender equity work began to focus more on an international effort. So, on the other hand, during the same period, women's movements worldwide were launching, independent from women's movements in the West. Right, so much so that the United Nations would declare 1975 the International Women's Year. So 1975, the UN declared International Women's Year, and that was the first UN World Conference on Women took place that year in Mexico City. So during this time, Latin American women suffragists were active. They were very active around their continent, as well as energizing others internationally. So these international movements took on leadership roles and shifted from what Tripp identified as the center of gravity in global women's mobilization dynamics. So this then expanded and enriched how we have come to understand feminist organizing and solidarity movements. So third wave feminism, this is more inclusive of Indigenous, Black, and non-white voices of color. A lot of people take issue of not the idea of non-white because then it centers whiteness, but basically here we're talking about the global South, women in the global South. Again, that's also problematic because what is global South and North? Then people say it's third world feminism, but then that's also challenged because is it third world? What is the first world? There's a lot of contestations happening. And so third wave feminism, a lot of these women were saying, hold up, like you guys have been excluding us. And it wasn't until 1985, the year I was born, so 38 years ago, that the events like the third United Nations Women Conference was held in Nairobi, right? So 38 years ago, 1985, in Nairobi, women got together, the UN Women's Conference, and this laid the groundwork for a lot of third wave feminism. In Nairobi, more than 60% of the participants were from quote-unquote the global South. Right, so the global South meaning Africa, different parts of Asia, Pacific Islands, just anything that's not necessarily North American, Europe, or even Australia and New Zealand. So it was in Nairobi that the women from the South, and this is a quote, challenged the ideological dominance and cultural imperialism of the North. This is a quote. And then they sought to redefine feminism as plural. So it wasn't just, they were saying, this is not just feminism. There's actually feminisms with an S at the end. There's multiple ways of being a feminist. And so Nairobi, the conference in Nairobi got a lot of these conversations started. This marked a shift towards more inclusion of diverse, quote unquote, diverse voices from outside of Europe and North America. So Nairobi was really pivotal for the feminist movement in that the tensions that erupted there resulted in participants really questioning gender in relation to issues of race, multiple geographic scales, as well as the role of women in political decision making. Right? So this would then shape how third wave feminism, has come to be characterized by tensions, internal conflict, opposition to feminism as a monolith. Right? This is where a lot of conversations about like you're being divisive and this is not inclusive and wah. Third wave feminism was really about a lot of that. So in an interview with Time, titled 10 Questions for Jamaica Kincaid, the Black Caribbean American writer Jamaica Kincaid stated, I think one of the terrible things that feminism never addressed was the moral situation. We are so interested in equality. We want to do the things that men do, but so many of the things that men do are repulsive and shouldn't be done at all, Jamaica Kincaid says. And she says this around 5 minutes and 34 seconds into the interview. So here, Kincaid reminds us that on this quest for feminism, we need to really be attentive to what Bell Hooks calls the patriarchy has no gender, right? So when people say patriarchy has no gender, they're saying that it's not just men that are patriarchs. Women also get adopted, and we are also socialized to very much believe in patriarchy. That is, even women can internalize patriarchy and misogyny. Right? And I talked about this, if you remember my first blog post I wrote, it was called I Ego You. And that was really an examination of my own internalized patriarchy, my own hatred, not only for self, but for other women. Right? And so it's not just men who are complicit to violence against women. women as well too get caught up in a lot of this. So in this regard, third wave feminists challenged internalized patriarchy and highlighted the divisions within the feminist movement. So South Asian artist and educator Vivek Shraya shares that misogyny's insidious and pervasive nature seeped into all women, even those who profess to love women, right, including feminists. And I'm going to quote Shreya here. So she writes, "I'm afraid of women who've either embodied or defended the men who have harmed me or have watched in silence. I'm afraid of women who adopt masculine traits and then feel compelled to dominate or silence. Women who see me as a predator and whose comfort I consequently put before my own." She adds, these are quotes, okay? "I'm afraid of women who have internalized their experience of misogyny so deeply that they make me their punching bag." So to this end, third wave feminism brought to light these inter and intra-relational breakdowns between feminists, even among those working really hard for a common vision. Kitty? No, please. Thank you. So in the pathology of racism, come, you have your scratch pad here. In the pathology of racism, a conversation with third world women, Doris Davenport articulated, while black and white feminists can sometimes work together for a common goal with warmth and support and even love and respect, occasionally, underneath, there's still another message. That is that white feminists, like white boys and black boys, are threatened by us. So this is what Doris Davenport wrote. So further to this, Chandra T. Mohanty asserts, and this is another quote from Chandra Mohanty, histories of feminism document histories of domination and oppression. No non-contradictory or pure feminism is possible. These quotes summarize a rallying cry of non-white third wave feminists, or simply put, just like black and brown folks. And this characterized a lot of the tensions and internal conflict within the Third United Nations Conference, which I already said. So the fourth UN conference was held in Beijing, and this was in 1995. So 10 years later, we find the fourth UN conference. It moves from Nairobi to Beijing in China. And this had way less tense. It was less tense in Nairobi, and it allowed women to expand on the definition of violence against women. And they included violence against women to include environmental degradation, economic disparity, armed conflict, and poverty. Right? So before, when we thought about violence against women, it was very much so like domestic violence. A man hits a woman. Or sexual violence. Now in Beijing, women are saying, okay, we need to expand this, right? There's a lot of environmental degradation that's going on. What is the role of environmental racism? Who is being affected? How is this connected to sexism? What about economic disparities? What about armed conflict, right? In any given war, we know that women are always used as instruments within the war. They're always the ones that are getting sexually assaulted. Poverty, it tends to affect, obviously poverty affects everybody, but when you have women are leading some of the heads of some of the households, we have to think about what this means in terms of feminism. So in a sense, Nairobi and Beijing, they really laid the groundwork for new articulations of Western feminism and feminist solidarity. It was third wave feminists who insisted on rewriting feminism's origin story, which then suggests that it's not only located in North America or Europe, right? They're saying, hi, there's actually a lot of black and brown folks outside of Europe and North America who have been really instrumental to feminism, and we want our voices to be heard. So I'm going to end this here. Like I said, this month, this is a reading from my PhD dissertation, by the way. This is taken from the theoretical chapter of my dissertation. If you haven't checked it out, I checked it out for the first time this week, and it's so me because the page number, it's just, anyways. Check it out if you haven't. If you want to, don't, that's fine. But I'm going to get more into this on future blogs, okay? So feel free to share, like, subscribe. Until next time, in solidarity.